Welcome to the Love is Our Nature podcast, episode 1 of season 2, and I'm joined by none other than Darren Austin Hall himself. You might remember him from episode 8. How's it going, bro?
Good. Feeling very crystalline and clear today.
Oh man, there's so much to catch up on.
Wow, man.
So much has happened. We recorded episode 8 where you were on February of
No way. So a year
last
ago.
year. Yeah, maybe early March.
Okay, cool. I like 8. 8's a good number.
Yeah. So let's just catch people up a little bit on what's happened. Thank you for tuning in, by the way. Really appreciate you listening. If you haven't heard episode 8, where we got to know Darren quite a bit, how he became a sound healer, his journey, and through men's work, and a lot of his process, I highly encourage you to listen to it. It's a very interesting episode. And today we just want to kind of catch you up a bit on what's been going on and share with you about what we're creating. There's a lot that we've taken on, and it's very exciting. So yeah, I guess I can share a bit more of what happened. So basically, Darren and I wound up as housemates by
Temple mates.
by mate, not by mate, by May.
On the spiritual
me
level, we
up.
were mating as housemates. And a
Okay.
temple, though. It was Templo Lila. So
I guess that'll
temple
stay
mates.
because I don't really edit things out. But yeah, I went to an event where he did some sound healing in January. I went to a second one that he gave me a heads up for in February. And then when I was looking on where to go in March, after spending 2 months in Potrero, mostly on my own, he was like, dude, Santa Teresa. And I went to Santa Teresa. I loved it. I spent 3 weeks, went back to Miami for a little bit, came back to Santa Teresa. After 2 weeks, this opportunity for a housemate in Templo Lila opened up. And I guess I was first in line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kismet, destiny.
What do you recall? What are some of the highlights for you of living in Templo Lila?
Well, we ignited this space in Santa Teresa called Templo Lila. And Santa Teresa was really it was one of the big, really nice kind of refugee camps on planet Earth during the pandemic. And when, the borders opened up in Costa Rica, because there was a bit of a lockdown, the whole world seemed to come there. It just brimmed with people from all over the place. And we just won some kind of spiritual lottery. A friend of ours bought these 2 epic homes right up at the top of the hill with an incredible view, a lot of Mother Earth energy. And me and my 2 original housemates, especially my one housemate, who was my ex, when we walked in there, we just felt like, wow, this is a temple. It really had that vibration. And we immediately started offering things like ecstatic dances almost every 2 weeks. And then some people moved out, and when Caesar jumped in, it was just perfectly timed to just continue that engine purring. And him and I, and then a few other friends who were in and out, we just kept that fire and lighting up some of the most sacred and special, I'd say, ecstatic dances in Santa Teresa during that time of last year. It was a really special time, man. We had a lot of amazing dances. There was beautiful different elements that showed up. I'll never forget the one where we did a lot of work with men and women. And it was just an amazing chapter, an amazing year that kind of laid the bedrock. And then at a certain point, Caesar started really co-creating and visioning this Gaia Awakening Institute, which I'm sure we'll get into more today. And that led us now to London.
London, Costa Rica. Yeah, it's been really magical the way things have transpired, the way things have just opened up step by step. It's like the stepping stones keep just falling in front of us, and it's so beautiful. What brought us to Londres, Costa Rica, is this opportunity to work with Posada Natura, the retreat center. And do you want to say a little bit about Posada Natura? Because I know you have a long relationship, and it's a place that means a lot to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Posada was the first place that I kind of landed back in 2019 on my second trip to Costa Rica. I actually came here in 2015 and didn't really jive with Costa Rica. And then I was invited by our mutual friend Tish, who did an amazing podcast with you. and she invited me to do the Envision Festival, and that was just like, wow, what a great opportunity to play at Envision. And then she was like, well, if you're going to be at Envision, why don't you offer one of your sound healing trainings? Because I'd already started rolling out Source Resonance, and I thought, yeah, let's ignite it. So she helped me manage it, and she said, of all the retreat centers, she gave me a few choices. She's like, Posada Natura though is like the most sacred one, soul family, and I was like, well, of course I'm going to do it there. So I didn't even look at the other ones. And the minute I landed and walked into Posada, as many people do, I love watching people walk through the gates with the statues and the water. And it's just always this kind of common sense of awe and beauty. And it always takes me back to my first moment when I walked in. And the retreat itself went so profound. I've done a few others since then. And it's on one of the most sacred and pure rivers, the Rio Naranja in Costa Rica, all of Central America, I'm told, which flows down just from the mountains nearby. And the center itself is about 30 years old. It was one of the first ayahuasca hubs in Costa Rica, so it has a lot of heritage in that sense. It's now going through a transition because the original owner passed away, and his daughter Vanessa, who's become a dear friend of mine who I'm partnering with on this, she's now taken it over. She's kind of wanting to take it in a new direction, which I'm helping co-author, which we're all helping helm. But one of the great things about Posada is it's on the edge of rainforest that goes pretty much all the way to the Caribbean side, and we're pretty much on the Pacific coast. So it's one of the longest trains in Costa Rica, and you feel Mother Earth so profoundly powerful here. And it was at that first retreat that I ran in 2019 that I received a message in a Temescal Sacred Sweat Lodge ceremony to move to Costa Rica because Mother Earth is so loud and proud here. And so I didn't really know that maybe that voice of spirit was actually speaking specifically of Posada. And now we're here. But yeah, it's just such an enchanting place, and this is such an incredible, and as you say, the blocks just keep falling, the synchronicities, it seems like we're guided.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, when I first came to Costa Rica, it was like a 1 month to check it out thing that became 3 months and then became the whole year. And some people ask me like, what keeps me around? Why do I stick around? And I gotta say, my 2021 in Costa Rica was deeply, deeply healing. I talk a lot about that process in the last episode of season 1. If you haven't seen it, it's episode 19, where I pretty much just recap all year of 2021. And one of the biggest aspects of that is being in nature. So I just felt this very strong, almost like no-brainer calling to somehow start to do something to offer this to other people. And I was very enrolled in Darren's vision, something he's been visioning for a while now, the Gaia Awakening Institute. We just went back and forth quite a bit about what would it look like manifested, because the vision is so big, right? So as we started to anchor it more and more, the more we were like, yeah, like the time is now. And we created even the mission statement of the Gaia Awakening Institute together, which I can share with you if you think it's a good time.
Drum roll. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. It's about time we memorize this thing.
yeah. So the Gaia Awakening Institute is a center devoted to the evolution of human consciousness and the reawakening of our interdependent nature and symbiotic relationship with Mother Earth. Through eco-spirituality, the restoration of indigenous wisdom, and cultivating conscious community, we're stewarding a new paradigm for humanity and a universal culture of peace and unity.
Boom.
Nice.
Very nice.
So,
Took us a while.
yeah, that was a
quite
few
Rubik's
hours
Cube
process.
of writing.
Yeah, language is so important, right? Definitely a Rubik's
I
Cube.
think we nailed it. It feels really nice every time I
It
hear
does.
it. It just seems more and more clear.
It does, and we want to share with you what that is, right? And for me, some of those ideas were new as well. So I want to ask you to just share with everybody, all the listeners, what is eco-spirituality?
Yeah. So yeah, this to me is like one of the big paradigms that I really feel needs to be lifted into the world, into mainstream consciousness. And in a way, I think eco-spirituality is synonymous with indigenous wisdom. I've had really the honor, the blessing, the privilege to have worked with indigenous elders back in Canada, Turtle Island. We call them there the First Nations people, and they have had a significant impact on my life. I like to say that they actually saved my life because the meaning that they introduced to me, the sacred meaning of the earth, the aliveness of Mother Earth, was something that I'd never really felt before. And I'd read about it. I'd read a lot of mystical takes on nature. I mean, I was a long student of Eastern philosophy and mysticism and Taoism, for example, and I practiced Chinese medicine for years, and it's founded in Taoism, which is a very indigenous Oriental perspective or tradition. But when I worked with the First Nation wisdom keepers, and they put us through different practices of being on the land and doing sweat lodges, for example, for many years, it was then that I started to really have just these experiences of feeling not only the aliveness of nature, but like communications of nature. And this started to make me aware that Mother Earth is alive, and the trees are alive, and the animals are alive.
When you say communications of nature, you mean like communications like from nature?
Yeah, I mean, I can, as I say that, this memory comes to mind. If I can just share this quick story to give people an idea. So, after we do this sweat lodge, our teacher Frank, he would put us on the land for maybe 2 or 3 hours. No one had a watch or a clock. He would just, a lot of us were fasting at this point, and we had been fasting for 24 hours. We would sweat at dawn, and then after the sweat, we'd come out, and he'd just say, "Okay, just go find a place on the land for 2 or 3 hours and just be with the land. Open up a line of communication." That's what he said. And I'll never forget this one time. There was this tree on the land that everyone called lightning tree. It's been struck by lightning like 4 times. Had this big like black gash, and it was still standing. And it was like one of the power spots on this property. There was a river in the back as well. But it was quite amusing because we'd come out of the sweat lodge, and everyone would be like kind of gravitating towards lightning tree, and you'd see some people be walking a little faster, and you didn't want to appear like unsacred and kind of impatient, and it would just there'd be these funny moments when you're like striding, and then someone would give up. And I was always like super polite, and I was like never the one to like really like stride over there. But this one time I remember walking out and just sort of wandering on the field, and then looking over, and like no one was at lightning tree. So I went over, I offered some tobacco, and I sat. And immediately when I sat, I could feel the energy of the tree. And I was doing some kind of qigong where I was extending my own energy from my heart to the tree. And I started to feel this symbiosis taking place, where our energies started to combine and sort of mix, which was extraordinary in itself. But what was really extraordinary is I placed a hand on the tree, and I closed my eyes, and immediately I could hear this voice, and the tree, and it was the spirit of the tree, and it said, "You've been lied to. You think that where your hand, the sensation of your hand touching me, this solid bark, is where you end." And the tree said, "What if that was actually the beginning, just a stop along the way of your energy, your energetic contact?" And then this spirit very loudly said, "Feel into me," like commanded me. And I immediately like extended energy into the tree, and it was like this instant feeling of just shooting up all the way up into all the branches and feeling this electric connection with all this atmospheric energy. And then another part of my energy zipped down into the roots, which I could feel were so much bigger than the tree itself. And just feeling this incredible, I was like convulsing almost. And I could feel all this contact with just, wow, all the energy and the minerals. And it was just this profound experience. And I wasn't alone in this. This wasn't like, me having a special experience. We would often come afterwards and do sharings, and many people would have experiences with the water or an animal that they saw. And this was in a simple way how the indigenous were regenerating this eco-spiritual sense in us. This idea that the ecology itself is spiritual, has a spirit, the great spirit, as a lot of them refer to. And for the indigenous people, when I got to learn more about their way of life and was enriched by it, that was really to me the essence of what made them so great as a civilization, in that they were devoted to this spirit of nature. They saw it really as their teacher, as their guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And they really felt that without this contact, they would be kind of lost and in a dangerous way. And in many ways, modern Western colonial society is so lost, is so collectively insane, as even Eckhart Tolle says, because we've been severed from this eco spiritual connection.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I became so lit by this, and I really felt like, especially in the framework of the environmental crisis, which was so obviously the major problem, and in my mind is still the major challenge, that, you know, despite COVID or whatever, it's still like we have this broken relationship with the planet, and the planet is becoming more and more uninhabitable. um, to me, this was the missing dimension. You know, I was watching the environmental crisis, the inconvenient truths of all these documentaries, the almost like a fear mongering, and then these kind of banal solutions like the Paris Accord, carbon taxes, but none of it seemed to go very deep. You know, and I could feel this malaise in the population with the political leaders not doing anything really to amount to much change. But when I worked with the indigenous, I fell so in love with the earth that I became compelled to want to be close to her, to want to be a part of a culture that would, you know, on the most pragmatic level, be involved with things like permaculture, but on a grander level, create a whole culture of unity with the earth. And that's when eventually a lot of the events that I started running in Toronto, we started following the pagan wheel of the year, the equinoxes, solstices, and all this stuff emerged from that, like a whole culture. Um, and you know, it's flowering now into this whole idea of having an educational portal with the Gaia Awakening Institute to start initiating others into kind of what I was learning from the indigenous.
I see. So, to shed some more light, that eco spirituality then is that sense of awareness of being one with nature, and it's not something. When I first heard it, I was wondering if it's something, a concept you made up, but it's actually not a concept you made up, is it?
Not at all. It's being held by people. It's still new. It feels like this very fresh kind of babe of a concept. And you know, when I even like hashtag on Instagram, for instance, it's like there's only like a couple thousand people. You know, but to me, the concept is just so important. And my hope is that we can contribute to raising it up to the point where, you know, I would be as bold to say that I think governments all over the world should have an eco-spiritual department, if not being directed by an eco-spiritual paradigm. It's that big. To me, it's that, because the earth is universal, you know, and the environmental crisis is a universal problem. To me, it would only be a logical step to think that the spirituality that is the earth would then become universal. And just to like really drive this point home, that's what I find is so interesting about indigenous peoples. You know, they're not religious. You know, they don't follow an institutionalized form of religion. You know, they live close to the earth, and the earth is their religion. And that's universally what you find with indigenous people, and that's profoundly beautiful. And I think why, when people have contact with indigenous people and taste their wisdom, it's like an elixir. You know, because religion is just, it gets so heady, it gets so divisive, whereas you know, indigenous eco spirituality is about, it's very personal. You know, on a certain level, there's obviously like the communities, and indigenous people were wizards at creating tribal communities, but it's also just about empowering the individual to have a direct experience with what we would call the divine. Except the divine's not seen as necessarily only out in the cosmos, because it is there too, but it's seen as being right here in our bodies as an embodied experience.
So, who coined the idea of eco spirituality?
You know, I don't know. I mean, a few people come to mind. You know, I think of, I mean, we talked about this the other night. You had asked me about, like, where did this Gaia theory come from? So there's this thing called the Gaia hypothesis. And it was this, I believe he was an environmental scientist in 1974. He brought forth this idea, which has been termed the Gaia hypothesis. So Gaia was the Greek god of Earth, or goddess, sorry. And James Lovelock believed that from studying environmentalism and seeing how all the systems are interdependent, they're autopoietic, meaning they're self-organizing on themselves. And when you really study nature and you see how everything interlocks and you see how it's always communicating to each other, he started to just feel that the whole planet, he had this kind of zoom out moment where he thought, wow, the whole planet, it's like a big sentient being.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess he had been reading up on Greek mythology and came across this idea of the goddess Earth being Gaia, and he kind of just had this eureka moment. It was like, well, why not regenerate this word and
Mm-hmm.
look at the Earth, Mother Earth, as a living goddess? And then another person that comes to mind is Joanna Macy, who I think was also making a name for herself in the 70s, especially in the 80s, 90s, and from there. And she's really like this eco warrior, eco philosopher, who I also feel carries the banner of eco spirituality. But as I said, it's very new. It's a nascent term,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just excited to keep it growing.
Yeah.
To the point where you hashtag it and you're like, whoa, there's a million.
Yeah. And at least for me, most of the people that I know, they might think it's just crazy to imagine that you can talk to a tree, right?
Totally.
So, would would you say? I think I know the answer to this question, but would you say that that's something it's an experience that's available to any human being?
Any human being. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
as Bob Marley sang, there's a natural mystic flowing through the air. And you really just have to get people to engage in activities of connection with the earth. Like
Mm-hmm.
after that experience with the lightning tree, I started doing these events in Toronto where I'm from called Tree Talks,
Yeah.
where we would just gather in this park near my home. You could actually have a fire in this public park, very
Yeah.
rare. And I would literally gather people together. I give them a little talk on eco spirituality. And I'd send them out to go find a tree, these big ass trees in this park. And I'd give them like half an hour, and then I'd like hit one of my crystal bowls and bring them back, and we'd talk. And wow, people
Mm.
had so many incredible experiences. A lot of them were like really surprised.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, "Oh, I just came here, wanted to just try something new," and then they had this contact with, the energy of a tree, the spirit of a
Mm.
tree. So to me, it's very potent. Oh, the lights just
Mm.
went out. What was that all about?
Let me see. I think we can still be seen. It's okay.
Ooh, what does it mean though?
Actually, one second. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. I had a little technical difficulty. So, you were telling us about how the experience is accessible to anybody to communicate with trees
Yeah,
and plants.
I mean, to me, this is one of the great revelations that I think also needs to be like species wide. If I can be like grandiose, is that in a lot of the research I've done, because I'm a huge researcher, I'm a writer, I'm a disseminator of ideas, and there's this real like kind of two branches of human thought. There's this religious idea that human beings don't have access to the spiritual realm unless
Mm.
they're like a priest or some kind of authority. And then there's this more, I would say, indigenous, you could say pagan, which is like indigenous European idea that no, actually, we can have each and every one of us a direct experience,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of what a Gnostic was called. And it's interesting to note that in the Roman Christian Empire, as that became this colonial power overtaking what became of Europe, by 400 AD, if you were a pagan Gnostic, it was punishable by death, and then that went throughout the world, so that all these cultures that were much more mystically inclined and very earth-based cultures, because they sensed the mysticism in the earth itself, they were just wiped out one after another. And I mean, that's one of the big stories that we're not really told in Western culture, is that you know that European indigenous cultures were also like significantly genocided.
Mm.
Um, anyways, that was
I see. Yeah.
taking in a whole new realm.
No, I followed your flow there, and
Nice.
for me, I experienced communicating with plants for the first time with
Mm.
in an ayahuasca ceremony,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what intrigued me about ayahuasca was that for me it was kind of like you said, cutting out the middleman, right? Normally, I grew up going to church where you go and you listen to the guy at the altar, and he's telling you what he sees God wants to say, and
Right.
he's kind of like the middleman. And it was so intriguing for me to experience that you can actually drink a tea from this vine and these leaves, and all of a sudden you experience being able to talk to a great spirit or spirits, and also to interact with plants.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I remember my very first ceremony walking outside at one point and touching the tree, and all of a sudden I could feel the message from the tree, and it was
Mm-hmm.
something like we miss you.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's to me like salvation. Like all the major religions talk about salvation. That humanity needs to be saved, and it's
Mm-hmm.
often in the form of some dude.
Mm-hmm.
Some weird phantom spirit dude, some messiah who comes to save us. But in my mind, like the earth is actually the savior,
Mm-hmm.
but it's actually Mother Earth. It's contact with that,
Yeah.
and witnessing ayahuasca and I love that she's this vine because vines when you apprehend them in nature, they just like they go into every area. They just like grow and
Mm.
wind and embrace everything, and she's really vining her way, all over the planet right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I was hanging with a guy in Costa Rica last year, a Russian guy who told me that his friend was in a shamanic ceremony with Vladimir Putin
Mm.
drinking ayahuasca.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're witnessing the highest levels of society right now are having eco spiritual interactions with the mother force, what we call the Gaian mother force, like Mother Gaia, Mama Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find significant is the ancient peoples called Mother Earth Sophia or Sophia, but some people like to pronounce it Sophia to denote she's more like a goddess than a human name.
Mm-hmm.
And Sophia means wisdom,
Mm.
so in this parallels, we live in this great age where everything gets united, and there's this universal consciousness. And one of my indigenous teachers, the late and great Dave Crashane, and Anishinaabe elder from First Nations in Turtle Island, Canada, he would often teach about how Mother Earth is our true wisdom teacher,
Yeah.
which is exactly what the ancient Gnostics were saying. And
You taught me the is it etymology of the
etymology,
word, yeah,
yeah,
etymology.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, not, of the word philosophy, right, which is in
right,
Spanish it's filosofia.
right,
Right, what is
Sophia, amazing.
how is that you break that word down?
Yeah, I mean it's so profound, like etymology. It's like tracing the vines of words throughout time.
Yeah.
And so philo means lover of, and Sophia, or Sophi, means wisdom.
Mm.
But if you give it more of a esoteric spiritual meaning, you can say lover of the goddess who
Mm-hmm.
is wisdom embodied,
Mm.
or who
Yeah,
is the earth, really.
it's philosophy.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
philosophy.
amazing.
Yeah.
Cool, cool. So that's a little bit about eco spirituality, and well, actually, there was one thing I wanted to mention about what you said. A couple of things actually. You mentioned at one point the meaning of Mother Earth, or the aliveness of Mother Earth, that the being involved with the indigenous, um, and brought up for you from what they shared. And I thought it was interesting that you almost used those words interchangeably, like the meaning of Mother Earth and the aliveness of Mother Earth. What? Why the word meaning?
Why the word
Meaning.
meaning?
Yeah. Or what did you mean by that? The meaning of Mother Earth.
So yeah, I mean, Mother Earth means, she's actually the author of meaning to me. She's disseminating a whole wisdom to us. And I wrote once that the geckos, who was it we were just reading last night? Our animal cards. The gecko is like the Mayan or some indigenous people say that the geckos are like the truth tellers. When you say
Mm-hmm.
something truthful, they'll chirp.
Yeah.
Uh, but I wrote once, the meaning of life is meaning. We're meaning animals. We need
Mm-hmm.
meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned by studying the ancients and the ancient wisdom, especially their take on Mother Earth, there's a whole mythology around the meaning of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole story about who she really is.
Mm-hmm.
The Gnostics called it the fallen goddess story, the story of the star goddess, because they actually say she wasn't always a planet. It's very fascinating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this current age that we live in. And Joseph Campbell, who's an amazing comparative mythologist, a lot of people know him through the hero's journey, which is, you know, this whole process that he illuminated. Um, he talked a lot about how, you know, and Carl Jung talked about this too, about how we live in the modern era, the postmodern era. We live in a mythless world. Like, we've lost these big stories, that when you hang out with indigenous people, like from young age, they're all taught these like big stories, and they're all a part of this grand narrative, you know, and their whole life is compelled to be a part of this, inspired to be a part of this great story, and that inspires their morality, their ethics, their evolution, their rites of passage, you know. And our modern world, we've really lost touch with this technology. You know, if you ask someone, well, what's the mythology, what's the guiding story of like being a Canadian, it's like, well, Tim Hortons coffee and hockey, and it's just boring. You know, there's
Right.
nothing. And then you look at people's eyes living in cities who are conditioned into these industrial mythologies, and like, you can just see this barrenness, this what we call vacuity, like an emptiness, because there's nothing inspiring there.
Yeah.
You wonder why people are 70% mental health crisis. I'd say a lot of it has to do with like, no one has purpose in their life, and
Yeah.
if you don't have a purpose, you don't have a meaning for your life.
Yeah, and there is something interesting that happens when you spend enough time in nature that I also got to experience for myself last year. Is I think in a way you get more connected to your purpose. It's really interesting. What I experienced was that the more I spent time immersed in nature, especially those first couple months in Potrero, the more I had, or the less space I had for things that felt inauthentic for me, like the mundane things, or even mundane things with work, or even my business itself. At one point, I had it on the chopping block. Like, did I just get rid of this? And or relationships with where that weren't totally heart based. So it's interesting how being in nature does that. Would you say that maybe you've had a similar experience, or
Yeah, I mean, if I can, I mean, that points to like, to me, the essence or the merit of eco spirituality, and it's something that one of the writers that I follow, John Lam Lash, I think I'm paraphrasing here, but he says like, you know, the point of the living earth is not, you know, we're not trying to have this relationship and save the living earth, just for physical reasons. There's something actually that when we have a relationship with the living earth, we get to a knowing about ourselves that we wouldn't get anywhere else, because we are nature. And if we can go even deeper, some of our ancient ancestors believed that we were actually designed and are the child of this goddess herself. So when we go to nature, more primal expressions in the forests and in her wilds, it's like we're going back to the arms of our mother, you know. And there's something that I think every human being feels about, you know, when they're in the arms of their mother, no matter how old they are, there's something home there, you know. It brings you back to a sense of yourself. And I think that more and more people are realizing this, that when they spend time in nature, and there's a whole other field called eco-psychology that's really profound about how being in nature has a profound effect on our physiology. It's very healing, reduces stress. So there's all these medicinal benefits. But I think the spiritual side of it that is very profound is that you start to be brought into this reharmonization with what we really are, you know. And I mean, it's really hard to describe it, because you kind of have to have an experience of it. And that's why
Yeah.
the Vision Quest is this technology, again, just brilliant psychological, cultural technologies that indigenous people have. And the Vision Quest was one of those technologies where, you know, it was a rite of passage, you know, in a lot of places. So when boys and girls came of age, they would be sent out into the wild to have an experience with Mother Earth themselves alone. You know, sometimes it's like a day or a night. I went for 3 nights, you know, and you often fast. I had no food, no water for those 3 days. And you just get to this place of being really emptied out so that you can receive. And, you know, but the Vision Quest was any time in some indigenous cultures, any time you needed vision about your life, you know, because they realized that you get the vision from her. You know, she's teaching us
Yeah.
constantly. And when I went on that vision quest, I went very humbly, just expecting, I'm gonna have a nice fast, my body might heal a bit, might get some meditation in. But truly, I received messages, like very profound messages from animals, from Mother Earth, that blew my mind. But truly, the hardest thing about that wasn't, fasting without water for 3 days, which was challenging. It was going back to the city afterwards and realizing why we are so insane as a species, because we aren't getting this periodic rejuvenation of meaning and purpose and direction, really guidance. Like she's trying to guide us. Like she has instructions for us, And this is something I think, to finish this point, I'd say one of the biggest problems that we face as a human species is, as I call it, the human supremacy complex. A lot of people talk about white supremacy, which in itself is anathema, but the biggest problem on the planet is human beings, we're self-obsessed. We think we're this very special species. Oh, we can create all these skyscrapers. Oh, look at all these technologies, AI, blah, blah, blah. But yet we've totally destroyed the planet. So like what's the point of all that? If we've done all this insane murderous stuff to the ecosystem, destroyed so many of our family, I'm talking plants and animals, like untold suffering that we've caused the ecology of the planet.
Yeah, Al Noor shared in the podcast, founder of Brave Earth, one of the founders of Brave Earth, that we have currently 200 species a day going extinct.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's massive.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like when I came back, I realized, my gosh, this is the biggest problem and yet the biggest solution. And my friend Lorena summed it up one day when I was saying, we got to save the environment, we got to save the earth. And she looked at me with a smile and she said, we've also got to let the world save us. And to me, that's almost like the credo of eco-spirituality, is realizing the world is alive and she can teach us.
Yeah.
And that's profound.
Yeah. And you also mentioned before how another one of the illusions that we've fallen into is, or actually what the tree told you, right? That who you are doesn't end where your skin ends. And I was listening to this Alan Watts clip, and he talks a lot about it. He calls it this myth that is not even proven scientifically, that who you are ends where your skin ends. And so it was interesting to hear you say that. That sounded a lot like that. How, yeah, maybe we were just conditioned to see ourselves as this individual, but maybe we're more than that. Just how the cells in our bodies, that we can see them as individual cells under a microscope, but they're part of something much bigger, right? And I appreciate what you said about how Western culture has us so disconnected from any of that. And I was listening to this woman who's an expert in the tantric arts. She talks about how we are, actually I think it was Diana Richardson that you put me on to, how our educational system is informational, right, or academical. Like we learn a lot of and it's all in the brain, right? And we learn a lot of things, and I feel like that's how Western culture is. It keeps us just in our brains a lot, and we have no clue that going and sitting by a tree or jumping in a river, it actually is going to recharge us, or that we're even one with it. And yeah, that was also a big experience of mine that I got to have throughout a lot of 2021 last year. So really great stuff. And I guess that's a lot of the context for what we're creating next, the Gaia Awakening Institute. So
Absolutely.
what do you want to share about the Gaia Awakening Institute and what we're doing maybe in the short term?
Well, it's one of the seeds that planted this idea for me. There's a few powerful things that happen. One, I read this amazing book by Hermann Hesse called The Glass Bead Game. A lot of people probably know Hermann Hesse. He wrote Siddhartha. He's this, I think he was a German author, but The Glass Bead Game was his final book. I think he won the Nobel Prize for Literature for it in like 1946 or something. But it's about a future world, like 25th or 23rd century. There's been some like calamitous thing on Earth where finally everyone gets to the table, and it's like, okay, we got to stop fighting. Like, we're really going to screw this up.
Hmm.
And it's decided amongst all the nations on earth that the problem is lack of education. Like, our consciousness is in crisis. So they devote one country to being a free, or one continent, I can't remember, but it's a free education center for all humanity. To basically just up level us. And there was something about that that, you know, then led me to studying the mystery school systems. You know, so in ancient Eurasia, they had these universe cities. Literally, a universe was like a universe city, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where you would go and study the universe. And you
Mm.
would study in this Renaissance way, the holistic sciences, you know, so you'd study astronomy and music and gymnastics, and you'd become this what they call a polymath, someone who's like a master of all these different things, you know, and that was really what was honored in the ancient world and in a lot of indigenous cultures too. Um, and so I started just building this momentum about like, wow, you know, we really, really need to re-educate humanity about nature, about relating to not only the spirit of nature, but even the goddess, you know, not getting religious about it, but getting very eco-spiritual about it. And then I just started looking at my life and all the things that I'm teaching and all the things I'm interested in, which so many different realms. And I just thought, you know, it would be amazing to have a space where I could also just house a lot of my stuff and help build a culture around this, you know. And so this idea, it was first called the Peace Center, and then this was about 10 years ago, and then that went through various different stages of development, and then eventually I settled on, no, the eco-spiritual paradigm is what needs to be like
Mm-hmm.
front and center. So I thought about creating a school, you know, where people could come and have experiences with the earth, you know, and then also, and this was initially supposed to be in Canada, you know, and then the pandemic, and well, even before the pandemic, when I first came to Costa Rica, that kind of shifted everything. Gaia was sort of like, no, you're coming down here. But the idea is also to create a space where indigenous people can come, wisdom keepers, and give them a platform, because it's something I'm really passionate about. Is that one of the things the world's lacking on the level of our leadership is that we're tokenizing the indigenous too much, you know, and we're also just like so much in our own shame about like victimizing them, you know, and
Mm.
oh, all the bad things we've done to the indigenous. Well, yeah, it's great, but they also have a significant leadership learning that they can give to us if we but make space for them and help them. The ones that are willing, because some of them are like, I don't want anything to do with you. You guys are a
Mm-hmm.
colonial nightmare, and I get that. But some of my teachers, they love teaching and they love sharing this knowledge. In fact, some of my teachers feel that it's almost a destiny of Europeans, white Europeans especially, who have come to North America, Turtle Island, that it was prophesied that we came actually to learn, to
Mm.
re-indigenize from them. So for me, getting more and more people in front of indigenous people, indigenous wisdom keepers, is also really important, because as much as I've had a lot of eco spiritual experiences since my work with them, I do think that they transmit things the
Mm.
most authentically. And
Mm-hmm.
I just know when I've seen indigenous elders speak to a crowd, the way they speak about the living spirit of Mother Earth,
Mm.
it gets right into someone's heart.
Yeah.
And to me, that is also another form of salvation. Just
Mm-hmm.
indigenous wisdom keepers, elders. So having a space where they could be platformed as well,
Yeah.
and also having a space where we could start building a community around
Mm.
that too. Because I do think the other way forward, as we move, you know, seeing the
Mm.
collapse right now of the empire, that's really what we're witnessing in the world. I think the movement forward is like, you know, we can protest all we want, but like we've also got to like create this new
Mm.
earth from the ashes and alchemize from
That's
that
right.
world that's sort of really starting to systemically collapse, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a part of the Gaia Awakening Institute. Is it's got a residential aspect to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? An eco village, and I
Not
find
yet.
that
We're
pretty
still starting,
exciting.
but it will. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, don't come just yet. That's probably phase two. But yeah, we've been learning a lot about that already, and seeing, and we've been able to see other communities that have started to develop an infrastructure that way. And Alnur spoke a lot about his, and there's actually, I think we're blessed actually in this country. There's so many different beautiful projects in that way, and everyone unique in its own way. Um, but yeah, another thing that I actually got connected to is the beauty of the simple life. That's another
Mm.
thing that the West, with the Western culture. I mean, I hate to sound like I'm blaming or making the Western culture wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it just, there's certain things that aren't very apparent or obvious when you're immersed in the Western culture, or things that it just doesn't illuminate.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things for me with the impacts of being totally immersed in Western culture my whole life was this whole idea of I gotta accomplish so much,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to achieve so much,
Mm-hmm.
and gain a certain status in society,
Mm-hmm.
and it's tough to escape it. You know, to have a certain car, to have a certain type of house, and then you have those things, and then it's okay, but then there's more. Then you got to look out for the ones around you, and it's almost like this never-ending chase for the material things in life. And here in Costa Rica, especially because I thought I was coming just for a month, I didn't bring much stuff. I put all my stuff in storage, and I brought one suitcase. And before I knew it, I'd spent 3 months out of that suitcase, staying in very basic Airbnbs close to the beach and the woods, and I found myself enjoying, after getting over the initial loneliness, enjoying my experience with a simple life so much. And even now, right, we just moved out from Templo Lila, arguably the nicest house in all of Santa Teresa on a hill overlooking the ocean, to this beautiful cabin in this tiny Tico town of Londres with 250 residents next to a river. And I like it even better than Templo Lila. How about you?
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, we got this river that we get to jump into in the mornings.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Eco Village project, I think, is going to be beautiful, because it's going to give people the opportunity to reconnect with a simple living, and might be scary at first, to the thought of letting go of all those conveniences, all those luxuries, quote unquote. But I find it's a trade-off that eventually is not so much of a trade-off, and it's quite a win.
100%. And as you're speaking, it's really like I'm having this light bulb moment because so much about getting back to nature and the simplicity of being rather than doing. So you mentioned like
Mm.
accomplishing.
Mm-hmm.
To me, this is like there's so many contexts to the eco spiritual paradigm, and one of them is it's about dismantling patriarchy
Yeah.
because Mother Earth is she is the source of masculine and feminine in a
Mm-hmm.
sense. If we really look at what the ancients say, the Gnostics apparently said she designed what was called the anthropos, the human genome.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something very profoundly feminine about her, and nature itself. The Taoists, for instance, talk about the supreme feminine constantly.
Mm.
And I think when humans start to spend more time in nature and they start to follow that Taoist idea of wu wei, which means
Mm-hmm.
not doing, which is their like highest precept. The emperor in China used to have this
Mm-hmm.
etched in his throne as his like governing principle in life to not do. And the paradox, because it's always paradoxical in Taoism, is when you don't do, something else does.
Mm-hmm.
And that something else is this guidance, what
Yeah.
they call the guiding realm in Taoism, which is nature's intelligence.
Mm.
So she's constantly mothering us in this way. But the only way to get there is to really step into the feminine,
Mm.
in all of us. And that doesn't mean we create a conflict between the masculine and the feminine. They engender each other, actually.
Mm.
One's masculine forces come into balance when you're more in your feminine. And the problem right now is that the feminine has been so denigrated for so long, has been so imbalanced,
Mm-hmm.
that we're now seeing this equanimity happening again, where the feminine is being brought back into
Mm-hmm.
balance with the masculine. Then they can start to become this circuit
Mm-hmm.
again, which is like the yin yang symbol.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what eco spirituality is also fundamentally about. Going into nature, just being,
Mm.
allowing those feminine forces that have been so persecuted in the outside of the world, in women's lives,
Mm-hmm.
particularly viscerally, but in everyone's lives, men and women, their
Yeah.
feminine aspects being persecuted, being denigrated, being vitiated.
Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't mean, that we're going to just become overly feminized now. It's about bringing it back into this balance where they work in
Right.
partnership.
Right, and getting in touch with your healthy masculine, perhaps too. Right, like there's an aspect of masculinity that I think we've gotten disconnected from, and I think in the feminist movement too, like sometimes masculinity in general, it gets thrown out like the baby along with the baby in the bathwater, and and yeah, perhaps the lust for power or the fear of showing weakness or vulnerability is some of what the unhealthy aspects of masculinity look like today. But I think there's also, and I'm curious to hear what you would say about this. There's also like a certain power that we get to embrace in our masculinity as we start to get further in touch with ourselves as well.
You know, they're always supposed to be together. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what I love about yin yang. You know, yin yang is also the symbol that was called the taiji, which was the supreme ultimate symbol of nature.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the Taoists were very eco spiritual. And what they saw in this symbol is you never have an absolute feminine or
Mm-hmm.
masculine element. You know, there's
Mm-hmm.
always a dot of the other. So it's showing that there's kind of this interdependence. And they're complementing each other, they engender each other. So, in a sense, we can't have healthy masculinity or femininity
Mm-hmm.
until both of them are brought into kind of a balance with each other.
Right.
And this is why, you know, you see stories like the King Arthur mythology. You know, you see this in some of the ancient mythologies because they were guiding narratives, they were wisdoms and moralities that were being passed on generation to generation, refining this technology of cultivating the best of our humanity. You know, so you see in these great stories. And this is why mythological movies like Lord of the Rings, people love them so much because they go there and they get inspired. They see like the king archetype in Aragon. You know, they see Gandalf in his wizardry. You know, they see the elven princess wearing this regal kind of healthy feminine energy. You know, it's very inspiring when you see archetypes expressed in their fullness. And in the same way, I think when we look at, you know, the King Arthur myth, it's said that King Arthur loses his sword at a certain point
Mm.
because he was wielding Excalibur in a kind of abusive way, like
Mm-hmm.
many warrior kings do. They need to learn how to really balance, you know, that healthy aggressiveness with not going over the top, you know,
Right.
becoming an empire or a colonial force.
Yeah.
And he loses the sword and he gets it back from the Lady of the Lake, this mystical priestess who lives in this sacred
Yeah.
fairy lake, and she gives him the sword only when he's proven himself, when he's
Mm.
proven that his masculinity is receptive to the lovingness and the caringness of the feminine, because it's
Mm.
only then that's like you're going to use this sword might for right,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, so they need each other.
Yeah, definitely. That's another big process I think that has been taking place for me as well down here in Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
Dance has been a big part of that for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first ecstatic dance. Actually, it was the second ecstatic dance I ever went to was a Templo Lila when I first got to Santa Teresa, and yeah, I used to be all self conscious and not sure what to do, and the more and more I started doing my own practices, put Tai Chi and Qigong with music, and then just letting my body flow. Yeah, the more I got in touch with this feminine energy in myself, and started to almost communicate with my body more. So that's
Mm.
been really nice as well. That's a whole other subject, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
our
yeah.
bodies being part of nature, and
Oh yeah.
just like with a tree, you can also communicate with your body as
Oh,
well.
big time.
So yeah, well, so
Yeah.
much to explore, and
This
when
is
to
why we
start.
need an institute. There's so much. It's a
Yeah,
lifelong journey of
we're gonna
wisdom.
start wrapping up now, and it went by so fast. I mean, we touched on quite a few things, but yeah, it's great to share with all of you listening the what's up and coming and the vision of the Gaia Awakening Institute. Speaking of femininity and masculinity, we've got the Kings of the Heart retreat happening in a month and a day, which is March 23rd. So very soon, that's going to be a very exciting retreat. If you're listening to this before March 23rd, you can go to retreat.kings of the heart retreat. No, retreat.kingsofthehearts.world. retreat.kingsoftheheart.world and find out all about it, or just message me. And that's gonna be really awesome. It's gonna be right in Posada Natura, which we're living 5 minutes away from it. And we also have an event with Moe's coming up on March 1st. Can you say a couple sentences about the Mo's event?
Yeah, I mean, it's called One Sound. It's going to be this very unique tapestry of one movement moving to the next. We start with this amazing guy, Uriah Tsur, I think is how you pronounce his last name. This amazing Israeli voice activator, sacred musician. He's going to activate all of us into our voices, which we will then sing into Moses' ecstatic dance. We're actually going to be collaborating with Mose, who's such an amazing ecstatic dance producer. And then his live set will then become a full-on ecstatic dance. And then I'll be doing a sound journey at the end to close. So it's going to be this one sound, incredible opportunity to come and see Mose.
Yeah, if you're listening to this before March 1st of 2022, you can go to mose.gaiaawakening.net and buy tickets. Come visit us. Anywhere in the world where you are, just buy a plane ticket and come visit us. It's going to be worth it. It's going to be that good.
Absolutely.
I love the idea of singing into the ecstatic dance. This is going to be a first for me. It's going to be awesome. So stay tuned. There's a lot that's going to be unfolding. This is going to be a great season for the Lovers of Nature podcast. We might just be launching the Gaia Awakening podcast as well. So yeah, just definitely stay tuned. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for taking the time to listen and hearing a bit about what's being created here. Anything you want to say before we close?
Yeah, I mean, just, I produced this wonderful album while I was here during the pandemic called Honor All Creation. It's all about eco-spiritual themes. It's going to be soon launching as a course as well. And it's going to be kind of maybe the first basic, because Gaia Awakening Institute will be a physical place at Posada Natura in Costa Rica, but it's also going to be this wonderful online school, so that you can have content there. And then, if you feel like coming and joining us in person, you can come down to Costa Rica. And this may be one of the flagship courses that is offered there, because it's a real deep dive into eco-spirituality, the Gaia story, the Sophia story. But you can listen to it already at streaming platforms, Apple Music, Spotify, 22 songs, all devoted to all these deep themes.
It's a great album. I've heard the whole album.
A lot of music videos on my YouTube channel too. We made a lot of really cool videos for it.
Yeah.
I just put out a new one for the song Nymphian. It's just a one taker of me just wandering around lip syncing on our property if you want to see where we live.
Nice. Cool. Well, that's pretty much it for this first episode of Love is Our Nature. Thank you so much again for tuning in. We love you. Thank you, Darren, for coming on again. And thank you for being a soul brother of mine, man. It's been a beautiful journey together.
Ditto, man.
Yeah,
lifetime.
It's been just like so organic. Everything that unfolds and our relationship too is something I highly appreciate. Just so much love and room and space for each other.
Mating.
No mating. He's joking. I might edit that out. Maybe not, because it takes more work than I want to put in. But yeah.
He's taken ladies. Beautiful angel that he's recently met too.
Yes, and we'll have to get her on the podcast sooner or later as well. Should be her any moment, for that matter. Alrighty. Well, bye-bye. Till next time. See you soon.